After my husband's funeral, I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, grief swallowing me whole, the house too quiet without his voice. My son Aaron had gone to bed early, emotionally drained, and I was left staring at old photographs, drowning in memories, when suddenly there was a knock at the door around 11 p.m. It was Ethan, my son's 22-year-old friend, a quiet, respectful young man who often visited us before. He looked concerned, nervous even, and softly said he couldn't sleep, that he'd been thinking about my late husband and felt the need to check on me. I invited him in, and what started as a simple act of kindness turned into a comforting silence between us, two people connected not by age or obligation, but by shared loss. Over the next few days, Ethan kept visiting, bringing tea, groceries, and quiet companionship. He never overstepped, just listened, and somehow, the sound of his presence helped me heal. One night, during a storm when Aaron was at a friend's, Ethan and I shared a moment, close, intense, and full of unspoken emotion. He confessed he cared for me, not as his friend's mother, but as a woman who brought him peace. I was torn, but the loneliness and genuine care in his eyes pulled me toward him. We shared our first kiss that night under candlelight, unsure yet sincere. For weeks, our bond grew in secret, wrapped in warmth and guilt, until one evening, a detective came to my door asking about Ethan's past. My heart sank as she mentioned a missing person, Ethan's old roommate, and suddenly everything felt like a fragile illusion. I confronted Ethan, and with trembling hands, he told me the truth. He hadn't harmed his roommate but had been haunted by that night, carrying the burden ever since. Despite the fear, I believed him. Months later, the truth emerged. His roommate had faked his disappearance to escape a dangerous debt, and Ethan was cleared. When Ethan returned with cleared eyes and a freed heart, he told me he no longer wanted to run. Not from his past, not from love, and certainly not from me. My son Aaron had quietly accepted it, telling me that if Ethan made me smile again, he was okay with it. In the end, love found me not in flowers or music, but in the knock of a young man who simply refused to let me suffer alone, and that changed my life forever. It had been 6 months since Ethan and I quietly embraced a life that neither of us ever expected but both needed deeply, a love born not out of lust, but out of healing and connection. Yet the world outside our home remained unaware, and sometimes judgmental whispers loomed close, especially from neighbors who had begun noticing Ethan's frequent visits even when Aaron wasn't home. Still, we tried to live in the quiet moments, cooking together, reading on the couch, and finding peace in shared silences, but the guilt of secrecy began to weigh heavily on Ethan, who one evening asked if we could finally come forward, not as a secret or scandal, but as two consenting adults who had found something rare in each other. I hesitated, knowing how fragile Aaron's acceptance still was, but just as I was about to suggest waiting a little longer, life surprised us again. Aaron walked into the kitchen one evening while we were laughing and gently holding hands. He had seen enough over the months to know, and instead of anger, he smiled softly and said, "I'd rather see you happy than lonely, Mum. Just be honest with me next time." Tears filled my eyes, not because of shame, but because my son had grown into a man with a heart big enough to accept love, even when it was complicated. From that night on, we stopped hiding. Ethan began staying over some nights, and slowly he became a part of our everyday life, not as a replacement for my late husband, but as a man who honored the love that once was and helped build something new in its place. However, peace doesn't come without storms. A few weeks later, Ethan received a call from his past. The detective, Renee, informed him that Jake, his old roommate who had disappeared and been found, had been arrested again, and this time, he was trying to drag Ethan's name into a new fraud case, claiming Ethan had known all along. The stress returned like a wave crashing over us, and I saw fear flicker in Ethan's eyes, not for himself, but for what this could do to us. We stood firm together, hired a lawyer, gathered evidence, and eventually, the truth held its ground. Ethan had been used as a scapegoat by a man desperate to avoid jail again. After the charges were dropped, something inside Ethan changed. He proposed, not with a ring, but with the quiet words, "Let's not waste time pretending life is guaranteed. Be mine for real." I said yes. Not because I needed saving, but because for the first time in years, I had chosen love freely, without fear or apology. Our wedding was small, just a garden ceremony with Aaron, a few friends, and a memory of the man I once loved deeply watching over us in spirit. Life had broken me once, but it gave me a second chance in the form of my son's friend who knocked on my door the night I thought I'd lost everything and brought me back to life. Married life with Ethan brought a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Our home felt lighter, warmer, even with whispers outside still occasionally circling like flies around old wounds, but we had learned to shut the world out and protect our peace. Aaron, now a year older and far more mature, had moved into his university dorm and was focused on building his career, occasionally visiting on weekends and always giving Ethan a respectful nod that spoke volumes more than words ever could. For a while, life was beautifully uneventful. Mornings began with quiet coffee and laughter, evenings ended with books and soft embraces, but fate had one final twist in store. One rainy night, as thunder rolled across the skies, I woke up alone in bed and found Ethan downstairs, hunched over his laptop, pale and trembling. He had received an anonymous message, photos from our past moments, intimate ones, and a threat demanding money, or else they'd be leaked online. My heart clenched, not for myself, but for Ethan, whose face was caught between rage and helplessness. We decided together not to give in. Instead, we went to the police, who traced the IP to none other than Jake's former associate, a tech-savvy lowlife who had hacked Ethan's email. The police arrested him within a week, and the ordeal, though nerve-wracking, only strengthened our bond. Standing beside Ethan at the police station that day, I realized I had spent so much of my life fearing judgment, fearing loss, but here I was, in the arms of a man who had fought for me, bled for me, and stood his ground not just as my son's friend, but as the man who became my entire world. After the case closed, we took a trip, just the two of us, to a quiet village in Scotland, where the sea met cliffs and the wind felt like a cleansing breath. One evening, wrapped in a blanket with his arms around me, Ethan whispered, "If you hadn't opened the door that night, I would have kept knocking until you did." That moment closed the final chapter of our painful past and opened the first page of forever. When we returned, we started a new business together, a small counseling center for grief support, where I could help other widows rediscover life the way I had. The house that once echoed with loneliness now sang with laughter, growth, and late-night jazz, and as the seasons passed, so did the shadows.